The silence inside the private Windsor room did not come from confusion. It came from recognition. King Charles had seen royal papers before, but this one carried a different weight. A sealed Balmoral Pact, hidden for years inside a private historical archive, had been opened by court historians, and its contents did not merely mention succession. It named the heir directly, with a clarity no one around the king was prepared to face. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not reach for the document at first. He stared at it as though the paper itself had brought someone back into the room. The king had spent his whole life surrounded by files, declarations, family letters, and royal instructions, yet this one felt colder. This was not a public speech prepared for cameras. This was not a ceremonial note meant to soften history. This was a sealed Balmoral Pact, a private written agreement connected to Balmoral, the royal family's Scottish estate, where some of the most personal decisions of the monarchy had often been shaped away from public eyes. And now, after years inside a restricted historical archive, court historians had opened it. The room tightened around him. One historian placed a gloved finger beside the line that mattered most. The pact directly named Prince William as the chosen heir to carry the monarchy forward, not only by birth, but by trust, discipline, and future authority. William's name sat there with brutal calm, cutting through every possible argument before anyone could begin one. The heir was no longer just the next man in line. He had been marked by the late Queen as the one meant to protect the crown from competing palace influence, when the family's private loyalties began to threaten its public strength. Camilla watched Charles closely. She had seen him wounded before, but this was different. The queen consort did not look at the historian. She looked only at the king, because his face told her what the document truly meant. It did not attack her. It did not accuse her. That made it worse. It simply drew a boundary. It placed William beyond reach, beyond negotiation, beyond the quiet pressure that sometimes moved through royal rooms without a word being spoken. Charles finally lifted the pact. The Balmoral markings near the seal connected it to a private family gathering, not a formal government process, and that detail struck him hardest. This was not machinery. This was memory. One handwritten notation beside William's name suggested the late Queen had wanted the future secured before any palace faction could reshape it. The historian explained the notation through a documented archival account, but Charles had already stopped listening. He lowered the paper onto the table, stood without speaking, and walked out. The closed door left everyone frozen. Camilla remained still. The historians exchanged no comfort. An advisor reached for the phone, then hesitated before sending the message that would change the air inside the palace. William was being summoned privately, and before he could step into the room, everyone had to confront the one question the pact had already answered without mercy: who truly carried the future of the crown? For Charles, the discovery was not just constitutional, it was personal. The pact did not shout, threaten, or accuse. It simply placed William's name where the king expected ambiguity, and that made the wound sharper. In one room stood a father forced to face his son's future, a queen consort measuring her own distance from power, and an heir realizing the crown had been waiting for him long before he asked for it. Charles felt the meaning before anyone explained it. The document had already changed the temperature of the palace. It had taken a private family fear and turned it into a written truth. The king was not looking at a challenge from Parliament, or a demand from courtiers, or a public argument over succession. He was looking at something far more painful: his mother's confidence, preserved in ink, resting more firmly on William than he had ever wanted to believe. And for a monarch who had waited a lifetime to rule, that realization cut deeper than any public criticism ever could. William did not enter that moment like a rebel. He was not forcing a door open or reaching for authority. The prince was being pulled into a role that had clearly been prepared long before he asked for it. The Balmoral Pact had named him as the figure meant to protect continuity, discipline, and public trust when the monarchy faced pressure from inside its own walls. Continuity meant keeping the crown steady through change, and in this case, it meant Elizabeth had wanted someone with restraint, not ambition, standing at the center when emotions began to threaten judgment. Before William stepped inside, he paused in the private corridor. Catherine stood beside him, watching the weight settle across his face. He adjusted his cuff slowly, not because it needed fixing, but because his hands needed something to do. Then he told her, quietly and firmly, that he would not let this become a family war. Catherine understood what he meant. If he walked in with pride, Charles would feel betrayed. If he walked in with fear, the pact would become a burden no one could carry. William had to enter as both son and heir, and that balance was already tearing at him. Camilla remained near the open doorway, tense in a way she tried to hide. The queen consort did not need anyone to say she had been pushed back. The pact had done it without insult, without drama, without even naming her as the problem. That was the cruelty of it. A document could reduce her influence more effectively than any argument, because it carried Elizabeth's shadow behind every word. A senior historian finally explained the force of the language through a documented archival account. The wording was unusually direct. It described William as the one entrusted with the emotional survival of the line, meaning he was not only next in sequence, but expected to hold the family steady when grief, loyalty, and private pressure threatened the crown's strength. Charles heard the phrase and went still. Emotional survival. Not ceremony, not image, survival. That was when an older memory began pressing against the room. Charles knew Balmoral held more than family holidays and private walks. It held conversations people avoided repeating. It held one particular night, when Elizabeth had watched everyone closely, when William had spoken with unusual firmness, and when Camilla had sensed the late Queen's silence turning into judgment. As Charles prepared to meet his son, that buried memory rose with terrible force. And that memory led back to one private incident at Balmoral, the night the royal family crossed a line it could never uncross. Years before the sealed pact was opened, Balmoral had already witnessed the fracture. It happened not in a throne room, not in Parliament, and not before cameras, but at a private dinner where one sentence shifted the air. Elizabeth listened. Charles defended. William went still, and Camilla's quiet confidence met the late Queen's immovable stare. That evening became the trigger everyone later pretended not to remember. Balmoral had always carried a strange kind of power. Inside that private royal world, family conversations could shape decisions long before the public ever heard a polished version of them. On that night, the dinner began with careful smiles and familiar restraint, but the peace did not hold. Camilla raised the idea that future family access should be modernized, a word that sounded harmless until everyone understood what it truly meant. It pointed toward greater flexibility over private royal briefings and estate decisions, the quiet spaces where influence could grow without ceremony. Elizabeth did not interrupt at first. The Queen listened, with the patience of someone who knew that dangerous ideas often arrived dressed as practical suggestions. A royal briefing, in plain terms, was not just a meeting. It was a controlled flow of sensitive information about duties, access, family decisions, and the future direction of the crown. To Camilla, modernization sounded like adjustment. To Elizabeth, it sounded like a door being opened wider than it should be. Charles quietly defended Camilla's position. He did not raise his voice, but his loyalty was clear. The king, then still waiting for his own full moment of command, believed the family had to adapt, and he wanted his wife treated as part of that future. But William pushed back with a force that changed the entire table. The prince said the monarchy could not become a private circle of convenience. Those words cut deep because they were not cruel. They were true enough to hurt. Elizabeth set down her knife. The sound seemed to end the dinner before anyone moved. She looked directly at William and asked whether he understood what protecting the crown would one day cost him. The question did not flatter him. It warned him. William did not answer quickly, and Charles watched the exchange with a discomfort he could not hide. Camilla's confidence faded, not completely, but enough for the queen to see that the line had been drawn. That same night, Elizabeth ordered a private memorandum prepared. A memorandum, simply put, was a written record meant to preserve a decision before memory softened it or power reshaped it. That record was later folded into the sealed Balmoral Pact, naming William directly. Elizabeth did not seal it because she doubted succession. She sealed it because she feared emotional weakness inside the family could distort the crown's future. When Charles learned that this dinner had triggered the pact, his shock turned into something heavier. His mother had not acted out of impulse. She had judged the danger years before the family was ready to admit it. And once Charles understood that the pact had been born from a family confrontation, the next confrontation could no longer be avoided. The meeting began with formality, but it did not stay there. Charles stood by the window, the pact lying on a polished table behind him, while William remained near the door, as if refusing to claim victory. There were no advisors, no courtiers, no prepared statements, only a father, a son, and a document that had reached across time to name one of them the monarchy's future shield. Charles had agreed to the meeting after the historians confirmed the pact's authenticity within the internal royal archive. That archive, in simple terms, was where sensitive family papers, private royal records, and protected estate documents were kept away from public handling. Once the court historians matched the Balmoral markings, handwriting, and restricted filing notes, the discovery could no longer be dismissed as an old family paper with emotional weight. It had authority. It had memory. Most dangerously, it had purpose. William did not step deeper into the room until Charles turned. The king looked tired, but not weak. He was still the monarch, still the father, still the man who had waited longer than anyone for the throne. Yet the sealed pact had placed him in a painful position. He had to question his son, not as a rival, but as the person his own mother had trusted with the monarchy's next moral line. Charles asked whether William had known about it. The prince chose every word with care, and said he only knew Elizabeth expected him to be ready. The answer did not soothe Charles. It made the silence heavier. William was not claiming a secret victory, and that almost made the wound sharper. If he had seemed ambitious, the king could have pushed back. If he had seemed proud, Charles could have called it disrespect. But the future king stood there with restraint, telling his father that being named directly felt more like a burden than a triumph. He said the pact did not make him feel powerful. It made him feel watched by history. Charles reached for the folder and opened it again. His voice hardened, not with anger, but with the shock of what he had finally understood. The pact's wording did not only make William symbolically important, it gave him moral authority in future private family decisions, especially when the crown's stability was at risk. Moral authority meant the power to guide choices, because trust, duty, and judgment had been placed in him, even when no public law was being changed. That was what made the document so dangerous inside the family. William noticed the second notation before Charles explained it. 2 words sat near the edge of the file: restricted influence. The prince looked up, and the king did not need to say who had been kept outside the late queen's confidence. The meaning moved through the room without being named. Someone had been measured, limited, and quietly blocked long before the pact was uncovered. Charles closed the folder with a slow, final pressure. The father in him looked wounded. The monarch in him looked cornered. Then he said the palace must now decide who controlled the consequences of what Elizabeth had left behind. But control was no longer just a family matter, because the power behind the pact had already begun moving through the palace walls. Power in the monarchy rarely arrives with a raised voice. It moves through locked cabinets, careful signatures, private permissions, and names written where others cannot see them. After the pact was opened, the palace discovered that Elizabeth had not left behind a sentimental note. She had built a quiet mechanism around William, one designed to protect the crown even if the family around it began to tremble. Charles stayed seated as the senior archivist began reading the connected entries aloud. The king wanted one paper to explain everything, but the truth was more ruthless than that. The sealed Balmoral Pact was tied to private estate protocols, historical records, and internal family authority, rather than public legislation. In simple terms, those protocols were the private rules controlling access to family spaces, sensitive papers, and estate decisions. They did not rewrite the throne, but they shaped who could move closest to its hidden power. The archivist did not soften the pattern. Elizabeth had placed William's name across several private continuity documents, each one pointing toward the same conclusion. A continuity document meant a record designed to protect the monarchy's future during moments of uncertainty, crisis, or transition. Charles listened with visible strain as each entry tightened the emotional distance between father and son. William was not merely mentioned, he was positioned. Trusted, repeated, placed where hesitation could not survive. Camilla entered before anyone could stop the silence from hardening. She saw the documents spread across the table, then looked at Charles, searching his face for permission to remain. The Queen Consort understood rooms like this. She understood when power was being discussed, and when people were deciding who belonged inside the circle. But no one moved a chair. No one invited her to sit. After a few seconds that felt longer than any speech, she withdrew, and the door closed with a meaning no advisor dared explain. Charles watched that door and felt the cruelty of restraint. He had not ordered her out, yet the documents had done it for him. Elizabeth's system was not loud. It was precise. The pact gave William a decisive voice over future access to certain private papers, estate rooms, and ceremonial family decisions. Ceremonial decisions, plainly, were choices linked to royal rituals, appearances, and family roles that carried public meaning even when made privately. The future king now stood inside those decisions, with authority no one could easily challenge. The archivist opened one sealed annex, and the room changed again. An annex was an added section attached to a main document, often used to hold sensitive instructions without crowding the central text. This one suggested Elizabeth feared the crown could be weakened by personal loyalties unless William was positioned as the final stabilizing force. Charles heard the words and knew the judgment was not sudden. His mother had built a shield slowly, carefully, and without asking his permission. Then the first consequence arrived. A palace instruction was drafted and sent through the private household channels, removing Camilla from a sensitive Balmoral briefing connected to the pact. The decision was short, controlled, devastating. And when that instruction reached Camilla, the discovery stopped being history and became immediate humiliation. Camilla did not need a speech to understand what had happened. The paper placed before her was brief, controlled, and devastating. It did not accuse her. It did not mention blame. It simply informed her that certain private Balmoral briefings would now be handled under the authority named in the sealed pact. She read the line twice, then placed her glasses on the table, with a stillness that frightened the aide beside her. Camilla kept her voice low, but the silence around her had already changed. The formal internal note was only a few lines long, yet it carried the force of a door closing. It limited her access to specific private Balmoral files connected to Elizabeth's continuity plans. Those plans, in simple terms, were private arrangements designed to protect the monarchy during moments of change, pressure, or uncertainty. They did not belong to public speeches or ceremony. They belonged to the hidden machinery of the crown, where trust mattered more than titles. The palace framed the decision as compliance with the newly uncovered pact, and that made it almost impossible to challenge. If Camilla resisted, it would not look like she was questioning a staff memo. It would look like she was pushing against the late queen's wishes. The queen consort understood that danger instantly. She had survived years of public judgment, but this was different. Public anger could be endured. Private exclusion from the royal center was far more painful, because it told her exactly where Elizabeth had drawn the line. Camilla waited until the aide left before letting the reality settle fully. She gripped the arm of her chair, not in anger alone, but in disbelief. The note had not shouted her name. yet it had reached straight into her position. It told her that William's authority was no longer symbolic. His name now had force inside rooms she once expected to enter, files she once expected to see, and decisions she once believed would pass through Charles first. Charles heard of her reaction shortly after. The king looked torn, in a way no advisor could repair. He wanted to defend Camilla, but defending her too fiercely would mean appearing to challenge his mother's final judgment. That was the trap Elizabeth had left behind, without cruelty and without explanation. Charles could protect his wife's dignity, or he could preserve the Pact's authority, but he could not pretend the two paths were the same. William received his own briefing with equal heaviness. The prince learned that his name now carried operational consequences, meaning real control over practical palace decisions, not just emotional meaning. He had never publicly sought that power, and now it was moving toward him with alarming speed. A second instruction was drafted for the household, quietly reorganizing who would receive private updates linked to Balmoral and succession continuity. Succession continuity meant the steady protection of the royal line and its future authority, especially during fragile moments. Catherine saw the danger before anyone named it. She urged William to meet Charles without advisors, without documents, without the cold language of the palace hardening them into opposing camps. The future king listened because he knew she was right. The pact had already wounded his father, cornered Camilla, and placed him inside a role he could not refuse. So before the machinery could turn family into enemies, William agreed to one private conversation that changed the emotional direction of the story. There was no table between them this time. No files, no historians, no palace language to hide behind. Charles and William stood together in a quiet room, where the crown felt less like gold and more like grief. For the first time since the pact had been opened, the question was not who had power. It was whether a father could accept that his son had been chosen to carry what he could no longer carry alone. William came because Catherine had seen the danger before the palace admitted it. She knew the sealed pact had already moved beyond paper, beyond history, beyond private anger. If Charles and his son allowed aides, instructions, and household channels to speak for them, the family would split into corners before either man could say what truly hurt. The prince understood that. He did not arrive to defend his position. He arrived to stop the pact from becoming a public family rupture. Charles did not begin with accusation. That made the moment heavier. The king had already faced documents, historians, and the cold certainty of archival proof. But this was different. This was his son, standing before him with the burden his mother had placed on him. The crown, in simple terms, was not just the physical symbol of monarchy. It was the duty, pressure, and public trust carried by the person at the center of royal life. And in that room, Charles felt that duty shifting in a way no ceremony could disguise. Charles finally admitted the wound. Seeing William named directly felt like being quietly corrected by Elizabeth from beyond the grave. The words did not come easily. They carried pride, sadness, and the pain of a son who had spent a lifetime waiting to prove himself, only to discover that his mother had already prepared another man to steady the future. Charles was not defeated by William. He was shaken by Elizabeth's certainty. William listened without interrupting. The prince knew any wrong word could turn honesty into insult. He told his father he did not want to replace him emotionally. He did not want to stand above him or turn the family against him. He only wanted to protect what Elizabeth feared might be lost: discipline, restraint, and the monarchy's ability to survive private weakness. That was the cruel contrast at the heart of the pact. William had gained authority, but it came wrapped in grief. Charles then revealed the truth he had carried silently. He had always suspected Elizabeth trusted William's restraint. He had seen it in the way the late Queen watched him during tense family moments, in the way she valued his silence, in the way she seemed to measure his patience. But suspicion was one thing. A sealed pact was another. A pact, simply put, was a private agreement meant to preserve a decision with serious weight, and Elizabeth had written that trust into one. William made his own promise. Camilla would not be publicly humiliated. Charles looked up at that, because the assurance mattered. But the prince did not soften the boundary. The pact would be honored without compromise. The private understanding steadied the family for one fragile moment. But outside the palace, the story was about to explode into public view. And when the world finally saw the first sign of what had happened, the monarchy could no longer hide the emotional force of the pact. By morning, the sealed pact was no longer a palace secret. Britain woke to a single image that turned private history into national drama. A newspaper front page showing Balmoral under a grey sky, with the headline declaring that Elizabeth's final trust had fallen on William. Outside Buckingham Palace, a quiet crowd gathered by the gates, not cheering, not protesting, but staring, as if the monarchy had just revealed its hidden heartbeat. Charles watched the coverage without moving. The king had survived public storms before, but this felt different, because the story did not attack him from outside the monarchy. It rose from within the family's own history. Broadcasters described the pact as a defining emotional document, not a legal rebellion. That distinction mattered. A legal rebellion would mean a challenge to the throne. An emotional document meant something quieter and more painful. A record showing where Elizabeth had placed her deepest trust when she feared the crown might one day tremble. William saw the front page soon after, and the image struck him harder than praise ever could. The prince knew how easily the public could misunderstand a burden as ambition. The headline made him appear chosen, elevated, almost victorious, but he felt none of that. He understood that every word printed beneath Balmoral's name would now follow him. People would ask whether he had gained power. Few would understand that the pact had handed him pressure, suspicion, and a duty he had never tried to seize. Camilla entered as Charles turned the television off. The silence between them said what neither wanted to say. The queen consort had become part of the story without needing to be named in the headline. If Elizabeth trusted William so directly, then every person kept outside that trust would be measured by the public. Camilla felt that truth immediately, and Charles felt the cruelty of it beside her. He wanted to protect her from humiliation, yet the country was now looking at his mother's judgment as if it were the final moral verdict. Palace officials moved quickly, but carefully. They issued a restrained response, acknowledging the pact's historical significance while refusing to deny its emotional authority. Historical significance, in simple terms, meant the document mattered because it revealed how past royal decisions shaped the present. The statement avoided panic, but it also avoided denial, and that choice spoke louder than any dramatic confession. The palace knew that dismissing the pact would look like dismissing Elizabeth herself. The public understood that instinctively. Commentators returned again and again to the late Queen's judgment, not because every viewer knew the details of private royal paperwork, but because people knew what her name carried. Elizabeth had become the measure of steadiness. If she had written William into the future with such direct force, then no family member could easily brush the pact aside without appearing to disrespect her memory. That was the trap. That was the power. Charles felt the pressure closing around him. The story had moved beyond sealed rooms, beyond advisors, beyond family pain hidden behind polished doors. Britain had seen the first sign of what happened, and the monarchy could no longer pretend the pact was only an internal matter. As the pressure peaked, the king prepared one final internal decision that would define everything. And in that final decision, the king would either fight the shadow of his mother's judgment or surrender to the truth she had sealed away. In the end, the sealed Balmoral Pact did not destroy Charles. It forced him to see the monarchy with painful honesty. Elizabeth had not written against him. She had written beyond him. She had seen the future coming, measured the weaknesses around the crown, and placed William's name where hesitation could not survive. What left Charles speechless was not betrayal. It was the certainty that his mother had understood everything before anyone else dared to say it. Charles accepted the pact because fighting it would have meant fighting the deepest part of Elizabeth's private royal legacy. The king knew that legacy was not only made of speeches, ceremonies, and public duty. It was also made of quiet decisions kept behind locked doors. Decisions meant to protect the monarchy when emotion threatened to cloud judgment. A royal legacy, in plain terms, is what a monarch leaves behind through choices, values, instructions, and symbols that continue shaping the crown after their reign ends. For Charles, this one cut close, because it carried his mother's trust, but not in the way he had hoped. William stood beside him without triumph. The prince understood that being recognized inside the family as the heir by birth was one thing, but being recognized through Elizabeth's deliberate emotional trust was something far heavier. An heir, simply put, is the person expected to inherit the throne, but this pact had given the future king more than a place in line. It had given him a burden. It had told him that the late queen believed he would one day need to steady the crown when others could not. That knowledge did not lift him. It pressed down. Charles took the internal acknowledgement and signed it with a slow hand. The document did not need a public announcement to matter. An internal acknowledgement was a private royal record confirming that the family accepted the boundaries of a decision without turning it into a public fight. The king set the pen down carefully, then closed the folder with visible resignation. In that small act, pride surrendered to duty, pain surrendered to order. A son accepted that his mother had prepared the future in a way he could not undo. William did not smile. He knew people might call it a victory, but nothing in that room felt victorious. The prince had gained authority, yet the cost was written across his father's silence. Charles had not lost the crown, but he had lost the comfort of believing Elizabeth's final confidence rested fully with him. That was the cruel truth of the pact. It protected the monarchy while wounding the family. It gave William strength while forcing him to witness Charles's suffering. Camilla accepted the new boundary because resistance would only deepen the humiliation. The queen consort understood that the pact had permanently narrowed her reach over certain family decisions, especially those tied to Balmoral, private papers, and future continuity. Charles protected her dignity by refusing any public spectacle. He would not allow her exclusion to become a performance for critics or courtiers. But he also did not overturn the line Elizabeth had drawn. That balance became his final act of control. The monarchy absorbed the shock by turning the pact into a symbol of continuity. Continuity, in simple terms, means the steady survival of the crown from one generation to the next, without chaos breaking the chain. Elizabeth's last act of discipline became William's burden, and Charles's painful acceptance. The moment proved that the crown survives not through comfort, but through restraint, sacrifice, and the courage to honor decisions made in silence. The sealed Balmoral Pact ended as it began, not with noise, not with applause, but with one closed folder, one silent king, and one heir finally carrying the weight Elizabeth had placed in his hands. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.